Early life of Buddha. The life of Siddhartha Gautama, who became known as the Buddha, is one of the most profound and inspiring spiritual journeys in human history. His teachings form the foundation of Buddhism, a religion that has influenced millions around the world. The life of Buddha, from his birth to his enlightenment and subsequent teachings, is both a narrative of personal transformation and a universal quest for understanding the nature of human suffering and the path to liberation. Birth and early life. Birthplace and family. Siddhartha Gautama was born around 563 BCE in the Lumbini Grove, which is now located in modern-day Nepal. He was born into a royal family of the Sakya clan, and his father was Suddhodana, the king of the Sakya tribe. His mother, Maya, was a queen who died shortly after his birth. Siddhartha's upbringing was that of a prince, sheltered from the realities of life outside the palace walls. Prophecy of enlightenment. At the time of his birth, a wise sage, Asita, visited the newborn prince and foretold that Siddhartha would either become a great king or a spiritual leader. If he saw the suffering of the world, however, he would renounce his royal life and seek a path to enlightenment. His father, eager to see Siddhartha as a powerful ruler, took extreme measures to shield him from any exposure to human suffering. Early life in luxury. Siddhartha's father ensured that his son grew up in the palace, surrounded by luxury, pleasure, and comfort. He was given everything a young prince could desire: wealth, beauty, and indulgence. He married Yasodhara, a beautiful princess, and together they had a son named Rahula. The four sights and the turning point. Despite his father's attempts to keep him in the palace, Siddhartha's curiosity about the world beyond the palace walls grew. At the age of 29, he ventured out of the palace on 4 occasions, each of which would profoundly change his life. 1. The old man. The first time he left the palace, Siddhartha encountered an old man. This sight shocked him, as he had never seen the effects of aging. He learned that all people eventually grow old, no matter how wealthy or powerful. 2. The sick man. On his second journey, Siddhartha encountered a sick man suffering from disease. This encounter made him realize that physical health is fragile, and suffering due to illness is an inevitable part of life. 3. The dead body. On his third journey, he saw a dead body being carried in a procession, highlighting the inescapable reality of death. This sight deeply disturbed him, as he recognized that no one can avoid death, regardless of their status or wealth. 4. The ascetic. Finally, on his fourth journey, he encountered an ascetic monk who had renounced worldly possessions and lived a life of extreme simplicity in pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. The monk radiated peace and tranquility, and Siddhartha realized that the solution to human suffering might lie in spiritual practice rather than material indulgence. These 4 sights, old age, sickness, death, and the ascetic, shattered Siddhartha's illusions about the world. He became deeply troubled by the suffering he saw and began to question the meaning of life, the causes of suffering, and how one might transcend it. Renunciation and the quest for enlightenment. The Great Renunciation. Disturbed by the realization that life was filled with suffering, Siddhartha made the momentous decision to renounce his royal life. At the age of 29, he left the palace, his wife, and his son behind, seeking to find answers to the mysteries of suffering and death. This event is known as the Great Renunciation. Search for the truth. Siddhartha set off on a spiritual quest to find the cause of suffering and the path to its cessation. He studied under various teachers and practiced severe asceticism, including fasting, meditation, and self-mortification. He sought enlightenment through different methods but found none of them to be ultimately effective. The middle way. After years of extreme asceticism, Siddhartha realized that neither indulgence in worldly pleasures or extreme self-denial led to the end of suffering. He discovered the middle way, a balanced approach to life, avoiding both indulgence and extreme asceticism. This realization would later become a core teaching of Buddhism. The Enlightenment. The Bodhi tree. At the age of 35, Siddhartha meditated under a Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, in present-day Bihar, India, vowing not to rise until he had attained enlightenment. He entered deep meditation, and during the course of this meditation, he faced various temptations and obstacles, including the demon Mara, who tried to distract him with desire, fear, and delusions. The moment of enlightenment, after a night of intense meditation, Siddhartha finally attained nirvana, a state of profound inner peace and insight. He understood the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which became the foundation of his teachings. In this moment of enlightenment, Siddhartha realized the nature of suffering, its causes, and the way to transcend it. He became the Buddha, the awakened one. The Buddha's teachings. The Four Noble Truths. 1. Dukkha, suffering. Life is full of suffering, including birth, aging, illness, and death. 2. Samudaya, origin of suffering. The cause of suffering is desire or craving, tanha, attachment to transient things, and ignorance. 3. Nirodha, cessation of suffering. Suffering can be overcome by eliminating attachment and ignorance, leading to the cessation of suffering. 4. Magga, path to the cessation of suffering. The path to ending suffering is the Eightfold Path, a practical guide for ethical living and mental discipline. The Noble Eightfold Path. This path consists of 8 interconnected practices that lead to enlightenment. 1. Right understanding, viewing the world as it truly is. 2. Right intent, commitment to ethical and mental development. 3. Right speech, speaking truthfully and kindly. 4. Right action, acting ethically, without harm. 5. Right livelihood, earning a living without harming others. 6. Right effort, cultivating wholesome states of mind. 7. Right mindfulness, being aware of one's thoughts, speech, and actions. 8. Right concentration, developing deep meditation and focus. The Buddha's teaching career. Spreading the Dharma. After attaining enlightenment, the Buddha spent the next 45 years of his life traveling and teaching across northern India. He preached his insights, known as the Dharma, to all who would listen, regardless of caste, gender, or background. His teachings attracted many followers, and he established a monastic order, the Sangha, which became the community of monks and nuns who devoted themselves to the practice of his teachings. Key disciplines. The Buddha's followers were instructed in meditation, ethical conduct, and wisdom. The Sangha grew rapidly, and many lay people also followed the teachings of the Buddha, engaging in practices like meditation, generosity, and moral discipline. Death and parinirvana. Final years. In his later years, the Buddha continued to teach, but he became increasingly frail. At the age of 80, while traveling in Kushinagar, present-day Uttar Pradesh, he fell ill. He was offered food, but the meal, believed to have been spoiled, caused him severe discomfort. The parinirvana. On his deathbed, the Buddha gave his final teachings, reminding his disciples to strive for their own liberation and to remember that everything is impermanent. He entered into parinirvana, which is the final nirvana after death, signifying his complete liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Legacy. The Buddha's death marked the end of his physical presence, but his teachings continue to thrive and evolve. His disciples and followers carried forward his Dharma, spreading it across India and beyond, eventually reaching places like Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, China, Korea, Japan, and the Western world. Conclusion. The life of the Buddha is a remarkable tale of renunciation, enlightenment, and compassionate teaching. Siddhartha Gautama's journey from a sheltered prince to an awakened teacher who taught the path to end suffering has inspired countless individuals across the world. His teachings on the nature of suffering and the path to liberation have formed the foundation of Buddhism, a spiritual tradition that continues to guide people toward wisdom, compassion, and inner peace. Buddha's attainment of nirvana is the pinnacle of his spiritual journey, marking his profound realization of the nature of existence and the cessation of suffering. Nirvana, in the Buddhist context, is the ultimate goal of spiritual practice. It represents freedom from the cycle of samsara, birth, death, and rebirth, and liberation from the 3 poisons, greed, hatred, and delusion. Let's delve deeper into the significance of Buddha's nirvana and the process leading up to it. The context of Buddha's nirvana. Buddha, or Siddhartha Gautama, attained nirvana after years of spiritual seeking and self-exploration. His quest for enlightenment began when he renounced his life as a prince in the palace and sought the answers to the fundamental questions of human existence. Why do we suffer? What is the nature of suffering? And how can suffering be overcome? After following various spiritual paths and extreme ascetic practices, he realized that neither indulgence in worldly pleasures nor extreme self-mortification could lead to enlightenment. Through deep meditation under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya in India, Siddhartha reached profound insights and realized the ultimate truth, which is often referred to as nirvana. The path to nirvana, the Buddha's enlightenment. The process of Buddha attaining nirvana unfolded in the form of a deep, transformative spiritual awakening. The following elements are central to understanding this event. 1. The Four Noble Truths, the foundation of nirvana. Buddha's enlightenment involved a realization of the Four Noble Truths, which explain the nature of suffering and the path to liberation from it. These truths form the core of Buddha's teachings and directly relate to the attainment of nirvana. 1. The truth of suffering. Dukkha. Buddha understood that life in samsara is filled with suffering, physical pain, emotional distress, and existential dissatisfaction. Suffering is inherent in birth, aging, illness, and death. 2. The truth of the cause of suffering. Samadaya. The cause of suffering is craving, tanha, or attachment to things, people, and desires. This craving is driven by ignorance, avidya, and leads to a continuous cycle of rebirth and suffering. 3. The truth of the end of suffering. Nirodha. Buddha realized that it is possible to end suffering by eliminating craving and attachment. This cessation of suffering is known as nirvana, the ultimate state of peace, freedom, and enlightenment. 4. The truth of the path leading to the end of suffering. Magga. Buddha taught the Noble Eightfold Path as the practical means to achieve the cessation of suffering and attain nirvana. This path consists of ethical conduct, meditation, and wisdom. It leads to the transformation of the mind, breaking the cycle of attachment and ignorance. 2. The Middle Way. Buddha discovered that the path to nirvana is neither through indulgence in worldly pleasures nor through extreme self-mortification. Both of these approaches were ineffective in achieving liberation. The middle way he discovered is a balanced path of moderation. It rejects both self-indulgence and extreme asceticism, instead emphasizing a lifestyle of mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom. 3. The moment of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. Buddha's nirvana is often described as the moment of his profound awakening, or enlightenment. After sitting in deep meditation beneath the Bodhi tree for 7 days and nights, Siddhartha gained insights into the true nature of reality. This moment is the culmination of his spiritual journey. The following are key aspects of his enlightenment. Realization of impermanence. Anicca. Buddha came to understand that all things are impermanent, everything in life, from physical objects to mental states, is subject to change. This insight helped him realize that attachment to transient things leads to suffering. Realization of non-self. Anatta. Buddha realized that there is no permanent, unchanging self, Atman, within an individual. What we think of as self is a collection of constantly changing physical and mental elements. The belief in a fixed, permanent self leads to attachment and suffering. Realization of the nature of suffering. Dukkha. Buddha's deep meditation allowed him to fully understand the nature of suffering, how it arises, how it can be ceased, and how liberation can be attained. Suffering is caused by attachment, desire, and ignorance. Realization of the cessation of suffering. Nirvana. The final and most significant realization was the insight into the cessation of suffering. Buddha's nirvana was the end of the cycle of craving, attachment, and rebirth. It is a state of liberation, peace, and wisdom that transcends worldly desires. 4. Victory over Mara. During his meditation under the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha was also confronted by Mara, the demon of desire and temptation, who tried to prevent his enlightenment by distracting him with various temptations and fears. Mara represents the forces of illusion and attachment that prevent individuals from seeing the truth. Siddhartha, however, remained steadfast, resisting Mara's temptations and achieving enlightenment. This victory symbolizes the overcoming of the three poisons, greed, hatred, and delusion, that bind beings to samsara. Mara's final effort to disturb Siddhartha was to send his daughters to seduce him with sensual pleasures, but Siddhartha's equanimity and unshakable focus led him to a deeper realization. He responded by touching the earth, calling it as a witness to his inner resolve, which led to the final moment of his enlightenment. 5. Buddha's awakening, the nature of nirvana. Buddha's nirvana is not just a personal liberation, it is a universal state that can be experienced by anyone who follows the path. Nirvana is described as the end of suffering. Nirvana is the cessation of all forms of suffering. It is a state free from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara. A state of peace. Nirvana is characterized by profound inner peace, freedom from desires, and mental clarity. It is an experience of deep joy, not dependent on external conditions. Transcendence of duality. In nirvana, dualities like good and bad, right and wrong, subject and object dissolve. Buddha realized the unity of all things, seeing the interconnectedness of the universe and the non-separateness of self and other. Freedom from craving and ignorance. Nirvana is attained by letting go of attachment to the self and its desires. It involves the realization that the self is an illusion, and that attachment to anything leads to suffering. Nirvana and the Buddha's teachings after enlightenment. After attaining nirvana, Buddha spent the next 45 years of his life teaching others how to achieve the same liberation. His teachings centered around the Four Noble Truths, which explain the nature of suffering and the path to its cessation. The Noble Eightfold Path, which provides a practical guide to ethical living, mental discipline, and wisdom. Meditation. Buddha emphasized the importance of mindfulness and concentration in meditation. Meditation leads to direct insight into the nature of reality, the dissolution of attachments, and ultimately to nirvana. Parinirvana, the final nirvana. Buddha's attainment of nirvana in life was followed by his parinirvana, the final passing into nirvana after death. This occurred when Buddha died at the age of 80 in Kushinagar. His death marked the end of his physical existence, but the teachings he left behind continued to inspire countless beings to follow the path to liberation. Conclusion. Buddha's attainment of nirvana is the culmination of his quest for truth, the realization of the nature of suffering, and the discovery of the path to end it. Nirvana, as the cessation of craving, suffering, and ignorance, is the ultimate goal in Buddhism. It is a state of profound peace, liberation, and wisdom, and it is attainable by anyone who follows the Buddha's teachings and practices mindfulness, meditation, and ethical living. Buddha's life and his attainment of nirvana remain a source of deep inspiration for millions of people around the world who seek to overcome suffering and find inner peace.